we'll finish immigration today, and we're going to talk about the importance of marriage and the family and how we vote in line with those things. Okay, so that'll be kind of where we go from here. So one of the things that we obviously confirmed through our discussion was if a country fails to enforce their immigration laws, it won't be long before they abandon enforcement of other laws. And again, it can kind of be in reverse. You can say if we don't enforce laws on these things, we're probably not going to enforce immigration laws, because you have to enforce law. That's really bottom line. You can't pick and choose. You have to enforce it. And so a lot of times when we see our ballots and we get all this stuff, there's all these new laws, and I always stop and say, well, why don't we just enforce the ones we have? Why do we need all the new stuff? Yeah. You know, it seems like it's more money, it's more committees, it's more things. And if we just enforce what we have, I think let's give that a try, before we get into anything else. And so this is kind of it's this kind of self-fulfilling piece. If you don't enforce the law on this, you're probably not going to do it on that, and then things are just going to spiral out of control. Laws that protect people and their property are essential for order in society. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
I mean, if you don't have people protected, they're not going to be safe. It's going to be chaos, because people are just going to be taking from other people or hurting other people at their, desire. And you need to have the order in society. So how many people, quote, this is one of the things we talked about, that it's argued is, with immigration and specifically illegal immigration, is that people are coming because, and they're breaking the law of the United States because they're really seeking a better life. It's just, I want opportunity. I want to have a chance for my family. And the question is, how many people that have that maybe good, we'll say good motive, have died or been enslaved while trying to get into the United States illegally? Has that happened? All the time. All the time. And so you have to stop and say, even if the motive is good to do that, breaking the law and going about it in this manner, not only is it bad because you're breaking the law, but what kind of devastation does it lead to? When there's all these difficulties in place to try to stop people from breaking the law, you have to get over these hurdles, and that's where people get hurt. Bad things start to happen. They talk with the cartels and how can you get me into the country, and so you're dealing with these evil organizations, and all kinds of bad things happen. Now, I quote the New York Times here because they're probably not the most conservative group, and they have even reported that many children who have come over the border are being forced to work in violation of child labor laws. And that's strictly because when they come in, there's no record of them. And since there's no record of them, guess what happens? They get thrown into all these different things, and no one knows it. There's too many people to keep track of. And so this is another example of, even if it's for the right reasons someone wants to come, if the government allows it to happen, it says, well, yeah, we want people to come and get a better life, so we're just not going to enforce that. Look what the damage can be of people who abuse, and when it's not properly done. This is the kind of stuff that happens. So if the message sent by the government is that you might be able to get in if you break the law, what will the desperate person do?
Break the law.
You might be able to get away with it. What happens? Some people will try it, won't they? I mean, it happens in any kind of law. If you lower the consequences or you eliminate the chance of being caught, what happens? People are more willing to try it. Risk reward. That's how society works, isn't it? You eliminate the risk, I'm probably going to try it. And that's how these things go. So the results. So in the name of compassion, many are hurt, killed, damaged, and destroyed. We don't want to stop anybody from having a chance at a new life, and so we're not going to enforce these laws. And then what happens? A lot of people are harmed. We just, when we're talking about immigration, what we need is somebody who will do something about it. I mean, that's really the bottom line. Someone who will care to some degree, and do something here. Because there are people being hurt and killed and, lots of terrible things, trafficked and all this stuff that goes on. And the government is responsible for enforcing the current laws to prevent this kind of a thing. That's a fundamental role of government, is to make sure they enforce the laws for the purpose that people aren't hurt and killed and damaged and destroyed. And so when we're deciding who do we vote for, you have to figure out which person or people, which administration, which group is going to be more likely to do this. And even if you said they're all bad, which again, they may all be bad. The question comes down to, is one going to do more than the other? Because unless they are identical, you can't say that they're the same. And they're not identical. They're going to do things differently. The question is, do your research. Where would they fall on the spectrum of bad, worst, all the way down? It's, I hate the argument voting for the lesser of two evils. I hate that argument because the reality is you're either setting up as many boundaries as you can to stop evil, even though it may not be perfect, or you're setting up none. You have to do something. You have to do something. Take whatever actions you can, even if it's not the perfect ones. You have two candidates today that have both a history in government. They've done things in the government. They have records of things you can go look up. And, there's government websites, or you can even go right to the government site and see how they voted on every bill. If you just did this is how my mind would work. I would look up like immigration bills. I would just Google. I'd start searching what are the different immigration bills, or whatever search engine you want. Or if there's an immigration bill, and I would try to find it, and then I would go say, is this a good bill? And if it is, what were the voting done on it? I mean, Harris is one thing because she was a senator. You can go look and you can see her Senate voting record. I mean, when I pulled up the one on abortion and we talked about, what do they do with babies that survive abortions, I can go right to the government's website and see how she voted on the bill. Okay. I don't have to go off of a dumb campaign ad that seems to rule the television right now. And it's just one of them taking the other one out of context so they can try to get, in my mind, the weak-minded voter to just believe it. Because they're not going to do the research. But if you'll go and you'll look at their record, you're going to be able to say, wow, this person actually took these actions to do or stand against this. And you can do the same thing with Trump because he was the president. Right. What executive orders did he sign? What bills did he sign? What did he push for in Congress? You can look those things up. And you'll get an idea of their worldview. You'll get an idea of their perspective on, is this important? Is this not important? Is it down the line a ways? It's important, but it's not that. Where do they stand? Go look at what they've done, because but you will know them by the fruit they bear, right? What actions, what things did they do, is the most important. To some degree, you kind of have some pretty clear contrast, which is very unusual because you had Trump in office for a long time, 4 years. And then you have Biden, who also has Harris with him in office for 4 years. So you can basically just compare the two. If we're talking about immigration, you can go compare them, and they are starkly different, aren't they? Because you can literally go down and see where there was a wall being constructed that was stopped as soon as the administration changed. Well, there's one point for you right there. Whether you want to go with the wall route or not, that shows you their perspectives, just on the wall piece. Okay. So that's kind of how I approach it. Just trying to figure out get them on the record. Don't go off the talking stuff. What did they actually vote for and do? That's the biggest thing. And so that's part of our responsibility is which one of these administrations is going to be closer to what we're looking for. Remember, perfection may not be attainable. So don't let the Christian mind a lot of times goes to, I'm only going for the perfect candidate. That priest, high priest, leader, pastor, Jesus is right there. This is the guy. And it's just not realistic in this current world we're in. When Christ comes back, he'll get our vote, obviously. But until then, we're dealing with imperfect people. And so you're not going to get perfection. You're going to have to pick something, okay? Something. And in men's group on Thursdays, we've been going through the life of David and David being a leader and his leadership and just how he was prepared for the role and all these things. He was not a perfect guy, was he? Would anybody debate he was a good king? Maybe the best king, him and Solomon didn't get it right a lot of the time either. They had some things that you could absolutely say were bad. Murderers, adulterers. They cost their army tens of thousands of guys on bad decisions that they made. You can bet that the people in the country are going, I wouldn't vote for him. But we get the Bible and we get the perspective of looking back saying these were good kings. These were great kings. So don't be tricked by looking for the perfect candidate because you're not going to find it. Try to find something that's better than what it is. So here's another example to just think about when we're talking about illegal immigration. I have to try to bring it kind of more bring it home a little bit, a little closer to home. So how would you handle your child if they wanted to break into a store to steal something they wanted? I know this sounds really like silly, but it really is true, because if you're the parent and you have a responsibility to make sure that your child is safe, that they're a good citizen, they do what's right, do what's good, then how are you going to approach a situation like this? You're going to tell your child, first of all, purchase it legally. I mean, that's kind of like number one, right? Hey, I want that, mom and dad. I'm going to just go get it if I can't buy it. That's not how things work, right? That's number one conversation would be, if you want to get something, you've got to work hard, get the funds that you need, go through the proper ways of doing things, the right ways of doing things, so when you walk in there, you can say, I did it right and I bought it, right? It sounds so simple, but what's the problem? Why doesn't that happen? Well, number one, because parents don't tell their kids this, which again, I think their kids intuitively know that they shouldn't be breaking the rules, number one. And number two, there's no consequence for it, right?
It should be.
And we don't like to wait. Kids want what they want. Believe me, I have 2 young boys, and when they get it in their head that they want something, it's hard to get that out. And when you tell them, like, we're not doing that today, you're not getting that today, it's just like meltdown city sometimes. And you go, man, you kids are spoiled. What have we done wrong? You know? But ultimately, they have to learn to do things the right way and not take shortcuts, because it doesn't end well when you take a shortcut. It's not going to work. And so you encourage them, go through the proper channels to do this the right way. Okay? And the second thing is, warn them of the consequences of the action. I know these sound like really simple things, but are they not true?
Yeah.
Here's how you do it right, and here's what happens if you do it wrong. That's like the 2 things parents should always have in their arsenal, right? Because if you don't warn them, they may think, well, there's no risk here. I'll just go get it and take it, and it's mine. And the reality is if you get caught, you could be fined, you could go to jail. It could be a situation where if you go into someone's house to get it in these days,
You may get shot.
you may get shot. Don't assume you're going to walk away. You know, there's a lot of risk involved in that action because of the laws that exist. So if you take it, be prepared for the consequences. How many stories do we hear in the news these days of kids having something tragically happen to them, and then the parents go in and they blame the police, or they blame this group, or they blame that group, and when you really dig into the story, you realize the kids didn't do what the officers asked, or they didn't do what was right, and then the parents, instead of saying, my kid should have known these were the potential consequences, and it's tragically ended, they come out and they blame everybody else. Does that not happen today? Yeah, I mean, I actually, quick side story, I remember being, I don't know how old I was little, and I tell this to my boys all the time, and they ask me, can you tell that story again? I don't know if it's because I got in trouble or if it's just because of the story, but I used to walk home to my grandma's in Kersey, and I would go up this alleyway behind her house. And, of course, I was with some kids that were probably a little bit older than me, and we were walking back because we lived right there next to each other. And the kids said, why? I'll bet you, it never starts good when someone says, I'll bet you, and they said, I'll bet you can't take a rock and hit that window on that guy's shed right there. And of course, my response was, well, maybe I'll try it, And so, boom, shattered it. Now, little did I know that my grandma was sitting at the kitchen window, and she always watched for us to come up the alleyway. And I was not smart enough to be out of view of the window. And so when she saw it, and immediately it was like, did you just do what I think? Yep, I did. And of course, my mom gets told, my dad gets told, and I can remember my dad taking me to the guy's house around the corner, and here's what I did. You want to feel about this big? That's what I felt. But that's exactly what I needed to have happen, because it was bad when I had to go, I'm going to pay for this, take care of it. Now, the guy was super gracious, thankfully, but I always tell that story to the boys to be like, don't do what I did. But again, it's not his fault for having the window there. That's how society would approach it today. It's my fault. And we have to teach people, do what's right, and then be prepared for consequences if you do what's wrong. That's why law exists, to thwart bad behavior. If I do this, This is what's going to happen to me, so I probably shouldn't do that. That's just like a fundamental rule that God clearly wants for our brains. If there's threat of harm to myself or being harmed or imprisoned or whatever it may be, I'm going to stay away from it. Survival. What happens if they decide to disregard your warning because they want this item so badly? Consequences. It's fundamental. At the basic level, with kids, with adults, with everybody, if you disregard the warning, the rule, the law, to do what you want anyway, you better be prepared to reap the whirlwind. And that's the problem, is when there's no whirlwind, people are going to do whatever they want. That's why it's so important to enforce the law. So a couple things. Compassion doesn't require removal of consequences. Do you realize that? We can always be compassionate and we can show mercy and grace, but there still is the reality of the law, which crushes things under it. It doesn't care how you feel. Its job is to enforce, to make sure that there is a distinguishing factor here. There must be a sufficient deterrent to bad behavior. Otherwise, bad behavior, is it really bad anymore? If you eliminate the law on what's good and bad, then you can't call rightfully something bad or good, because there's nothing to define it anymore. It's gone. Loving someone in the midst of their sin is different than supporting or allowing their sin to continue. That applies in about everything. Love the sinner, hate the sin. You've probably heard that before. Progressive Christians have completely separated love and compassion from consequence.
Yeah.
They like to preach the love and compassion side, but we don't like to preach the side of let's do what's right and there's consequences when we do what's wrong. We don't like that. See, when you slip just into love and grace and you eliminate the consequence, pretty soon you start preaching only love and grace. And then this idea that Jesus died on a cross for my sin starts to become something that disappears. Because what's the consequence of sin? What am I actually being saved from? We don't want to talk about any of this bad stuff, so we just love, 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 compassion, love, grace, 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 and we forget to tell people the most important part of our salvation is that Christ died for us in our place so that we would not go to hell, right? Fundamentally, I want to survive. I want to live. Well, Christ says, I've come to give you eternal life. Why does that matter? Because we want to live. It's the same as this. You follow the rules, you don't break them, you're going to have life. You break the rules, you're going to have consequences, which could be death. Could be death. So this leads to grace movements, which allow for the sinful lifestyle to grow without restraint. They never correct anything. There's never any consequence. So what do? We just love you, love you, love you, and that's all we do. And so then you just go further and further into this mindset. You don't think Satan knows how to use love and grace to get people? You don't think he knows how to manipulate the good things of God to trap people and to get the people of God? Of course he does. Of course he does. He absolutely uses it. Grace, 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 love, love, love. And we'll just fill society with sin because no one ever wants to correct anything. No one wants to draw a line in the sand anymore. That's what happens. Romans 6:15. What then? Shall we sin because we are not under law but under grace? May it never be. So even when Paul's talking to the Christian and he says, yeah, we have been covered by the grace of God and we're under the grace of God, does that give us a license to just say, forget the law, we'll do whatever we want?
No.
Of course not. Of course not. Because that's number one, hypocrisy. And number two, you're still putting yourself out there where you could have consequences. There's still risk involved when you do what's wrong in a number of things. I mean, your witness for God, harm to you, harm to someone else. Things still exist. So the biblical response, personal interaction should always reflect Jesus Christ. Agree with that, right? We should always act as Christ would want us to. Government interactions must reflect the purpose and role of government as ordained by God. Sometimes it may not be borrow from me without restraint. Turn the other cheek. That may be a personal thing, but that's not the government's role. The government's role is to enforce the law, to make sure that people can thrive and have a safe environment to live. And so they have to carry the sword, as Romans puts it, for a purpose. Punish evil, reward good. Romans 13. That's their whole role. There it is. Support order, not chaos. Is God a God of order or a God of chaos?
Order.
Order. He wants order. He does not want chaos. That means you have to take steps to ensure order exists. Proper way of doing things. Those types of things. Protect the individuals who should reflect Jesus Christ. Yeah, that's what the government should do. Or any group, but specifically the Christian community. Illegal is illegal regardless of reason. How many times your kids go, why did you do that to your brother? Well, and there's all these reasons. He did it first. He gave me a dirty look. I bet I dealt with that 50 times yesterday at home. And the reality is we always come back to the same thing, which is, what is the rule? Are you supposed to hit your brother? No. I don't care what his reason is or your reason was, you broke the rule. Christians should always seek to love and help, but also correct and rebuke. We're given both mandates. Of course you do it lovingly and graciously, but it doesn't mean you move the line of holiness and rightness for love and grace. When you start doing that, now you're stepping outside of the authority level. You got to hold the line at the same time. It's important. True love corrects while also showing compassion. If you don't tell your child you stole that thing, you broke that window, you're going to have consequences. They're going to do it again. And the loving thing to do is to put them on the path where they don't do it again, which could end up a lot worse for them. Okay, so that's where we're going to stop our immigration discussion. So I want to talk about this one because there's some questions that pop up on this one. There's actually a ballot item that says, should we redefine marriage to include... And so I think I probably don't need to tell you how to vote, but I can assure you after we're done here, you will know exactly how to vote. What is the biblical view of marriage and the family? Do you think that's important to know, first of all? Yeah. Here's a big one. Should the government set the definition of marriage or stay out of it completely? What's the government's responsibility on this topic? When God says, I establish governments for specific purposes, what are their roles? Order, obviously, is one of the big ones. Keeping order and not chaos. What else are they supposed to do? Reward good, punish evil. And so their job is to uphold good, promote good, and try to thwart, discourage evil. Would you agree? Yes. Okay, so let's talk. We're going to talk about this question because this is going to be an important one. Should the government set the definition of marriage or stay out of it completely? We'll talk about that one. Should this be an issue taken into consideration at all by voters when picking a candidate or administration in the U.S. elections? Yes. Should we even care what the candidates think on this topic? Yes. We'll talk about it. Shouldn't Christians stop imposing their beliefs on others on this? No. Well, we'll see. We'll talk about that. I'm leaving you hanging. So we're going to talk a little bit about it. I'm just going to set some kind of bottom line foundational stuff here. So here's a question. Who gets to define marriage? I mean, there has to be someone. That's one thing we've been talking about. How do you define? Definitions are extremely important because someone has to have the authority to define things. Give them their meaning, give them their limits. When God spoke in the beginning, the Word, He created everything, and what did He do with that? He set the boundaries of land and sea. And you see, someone has to have the authority with their word definitions of things. Where does this begin? Where does this end? Where does this stop? And ultimately, if you trace it far enough, you either say there's no one, there's no God, so therefore there is no ultimate authority. And that's where you end up with survival of the fittest. That's where you end up with Hitler saying, I define, and I'm going to wipe this group out. And people come in and say, well, you can't do that. Who says? But when you have God, which is essential, even a guy like Elon Musk, who I would say is not probably a Christian guy, knows religion. They'll always say religion. That this idea of a higher being that establishes good is essential to a society. Because if you don't, it's chaos. Everyone gets to decide what truth is. Doesn't work. The government's role is strictly to reward good, punish evil. They carry the sword for that purpose alone. And it's really hard to read that and hear that because we go, what do you mean by good and evil? And when we aren't willing to say, well, there's a reason we have the Ten Commandments in our courtrooms at the Supreme Court, because at some point they agreed that the way that we determine good law is we have to go to the authority on law to begin with, and that is God. That's it. It doesn't matter where you go. You cannot make an argument without God for truth. You can't do it. You have to have an authority figure that establishes it simply because he's the authority, or it's just shaky ground. It's all a matter of opinion. That's one thing, if you ever studied Christian apologetics, you'll learn, is that truth is absolute, because if God declares something and we say there is no God, it doesn't matter. My opinion is no different than yours. And that leads to chaos. And if you want chaos, I guess go that route, but nobody wants that. Even the atheist doesn't want chaos. He wants to have a safe place to raise his family and do the things that he wants to do without being bothered. And why is that? Because that's what he's designed to do. That's what he's designed to do. So who gets to define it? And why is the definition important? Because of what I just said. It sets these boundaries around this word, and this is where it begins, this is where it ends. Romans 13:4, here it is. For it's talking about the government, is God's servant to you for what is good. For you, what is good. Those are the key things to keep in mind. What's good, and what's the government's role? To make sure that's protected for me. So the term has to be defined. I don't care how you slice it. This is where the debate rages. What do you mean by good? What's good, what's bad? Well, it's good that people get to come here for a new life. But it's bad that they break the law. Is it? Well, that's the problem, is we prioritize all these things. It is defined by the ultimate authority on good. There has to be someone that says, I hold the degree on good, and there is no one higher, and that's God.
Yep.
It is also called good because of what it produces. We forget, God didn't just flip coins and be like, murder, good, bad. Oh, we'll call this one bad. He said it because his character is, first of all, not a murderer. And secondly, he also knows that if you murder, what's probably going to happen? Bad things.
Yep.
Death is not in the plan. I don't want death. And I also don't want you to go kill people, because then other people are going to say, how dare you kill him? I'm going to kill you. And guess what happens? And so the production, the fruit that it produces, I think it was a perfect illustration Jesus uses. You're producing something. Is it good or bad? What's being produced? Rotten fruit? Good fruit? Well, you'll know by what you see happen. If it was good or bad, makes sense. Genesis 2:20. So we're going to look at this and we're going to stop. The man gave names to every domesticated animal and to the birds of heaven and to all the wild animals, but for the man there was not found a helper as his counterpart. All this stuff's done, and yet there's something missing. This guy needs something to do the job that God has put forth for him to do, the Edenic mandate. And so why a couple? Well, man was tasked with ruling the earth and filling it, right? It's pretty hard to do by yourself. The filling it part might be real hard to do, if impossible. The Edenic mandate said, I want you to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. You're supposed to take care of it, subdue the earth, and fill it. He can't do that by himself. Can't do it. Not biologically, not psychologically. He's missing something. He's lacking. There was nothing created which was fitting to assist him in the role at that point. Nothing. All the animals were done, nothing good enough. This is the only instance in which God identifies an incompleteness in the creative process. In fact, he even says, then Yahweh God said, it is not good. So here's the definer of good saying, we've got something really good here, but this part of it, there's a state we're in that's not good. And so what does he do? It's not good that man is alone. I will make for him a helper as his counterpart. And so what does he do? He goes in, Yahweh fashioned the rib from which he had taken from the man into a woman and brought her to the man. And the man said, she is now bone from my bones and flesh from my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken from man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and cling to his wife, and they shall be as one flesh. You wonder when God said, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, Adam's going, I don't understand this. What do you mean? I don't know, understand mother. I understand father from you created me sense. But what do you mean, leave my mom and dad? And so God establishes this not because he just felt like it, but because this is the only way this human thing will work. It has to have a man this way, a woman this way. And when the two come together in the right way, this is where my Edenic mandate goes forward and is accomplishing what I want, which is to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and take my glory to the rest of the earth. And so this is God's perspective on these things. So here I'm going to give you the plan, and then we're going to stop. God had clear plans in mind for the man. Would you agree?
Yep.
Man would not be able to achieve success in God's plan by being alone. Yep, pretty hard to multiply by yourself. That's a big one. Alone meant without a counterpart like him, but different from him. A counterpart, somebody that can make sure that there's a good complement going on here. God's creative process did not involve making another man like Adam to assist him. Did you notice that? Like that, why don't just make him another guy and call him, Steve or whatever. And Adam and Steve can go. And these two guys will accomplish everything you need. You want subduing? Yep, they'll do it. But it's not right. It's not what God has in mind. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. God needed someone not like Adam to assist him properly. Another design that's similar but different. Man and woman were defined by God in the beginning for an ultimate purpose, not because he just felt like making multiple different things. It was, I have purpose in mind to do this, which is to fill the earth, which is the big one. Man and woman were designed biologically, psychologically, for one another in the plan of God. Differently. You can't get away from this. It's in every society, it's in every state, it's in all of history. It goes back as far as humanity goes. You can't change this because this is how the world operates.